Alright, so today I'm going to be unboxing the Festool TSV 60 track saw, and the number on it is the TSV 60K, or also over here is TSV 60 KEB F Plus is what I have here. Now when I purchased this particular track saw, I did purchase it with the 75-inch rail, which I have behind me. And let's go ahead and open it up and see what it looks like on the inside. So this is the presentation of the saw here. You can see that you have the track saw here. And let's go ahead and pull it out and get a closer look at it. So taking the saw out, I'll face it this way because right off the bat, let's go ahead and look at the fact that it does have the integrated power cord. It does not have a plug-in cord. Now, in the box, the only other things that were included were the warranty inclusive and also the actual manual, which I will be going through that later. Now, taking a closer look at the saw, it has a very similar footprint as the TS60. However, you just have this additional area here. This is a whole motor housing for the actual TSV 60. And inside of this motor housing is what they have is a scoring blade. So I'm going to go ahead and activate this here now, and then as I depress the saw, you can see on the front here where my finger is, there is a scoring blade. It's a diamond coated blade that actually spins in the opposite direction of the main saw to actually work on laminates and veneers, things that you don't want to have tear out on, and you get that nice, precise, clean line. So this particular saw, I chose to go ahead and get an extra rail with it simply because the blade has the ability to go to the left or the right, meaning the scoring blade, and thus forth if I use this saw on another rail, it could actually mess up the zero clearance for that particular rail. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the saw. So as we take a closer look here at the TSV 60 KEB, right in this location is where you're actually going to be able to adjust your depth of cut. On this side you have the metric, and then on the right side of the saw you have the imperial, and you have two markings here. You have the FS, and then you also have another mark below it. The lower mark is for cutting off the rail, the FS is for cutting on the rail. So basically if I wanted to cut 20 millimeters on the rail, I would set the saw about there, and if I wanted to cut 20 millimeters off the rail, I would make my cut just a bit shallower there. There's a 5 millimeter difference in the setting for when you're cutting on versus off the rail. So the mechanism is the same as the TS60, where you have a clamp and slide mechanism, and in addition to that, if you look back here, you have a dial. This is your micro adjust dial, so you can rotate it left or right accordingly, and that's going to dial in the settings on your saw. So let's say if you have this set at 20 millimeter and 20 millimeter and your stock is 20 millimeter and you're not able to cut all the way through, you may need to dial your saw in just a little bit more to make it accurate so that it will cut all the way through. So let's look in here at some of the other components on the inside of the saw. All right. So this right here is the dial that you're going to utilize to rotate the blade, or to basically move your scoring blade left to right, okay? That's this particular dial right here, and it rotates either to the left or to the right. There's an R and there's an L on the actual dial. That's what you're going to use to dial in to get your saw lined up perfectly, or your actual scoring blade lined up perfectly with your primary blade. Right here, in this section, this particular dial on top, it has a plus and a minus sign, and basically what that's going to give you the ability to do is to determine the actual width or depth of your the width of your scoring cut. So if I'm able to get this in focus, I'm not sure if I can. Yeah, I think it's right here. Okay, if you take a look right here, there is a diagram. And basically if I rotate this dial, the green dial that I pointed out before on top with the plus and the minus sign, to the left, it's going to give me a shallower or narrower cut. And if I rotate it to the right, it's going to give me a wider scoring cut. So you have that form of adjustment available to you. Now, in order to activate the scoring cut, let's take a look in here. You see this green lever here. When you actually push it, you can actually see the mechanics of the saw moving back and forth. So with the blade down, it is in the off position. So right here, this is the off position for the scoring blade. When I push it up like that, now the scoring blade is activated. As I rotate the saw around again, at this section here, this green button here is going to be your spindle lock that you're going to push for when you want to change your scoring blade. There is an Allen key right here that's on board on the device that you will utilize, and it stores nicely on the machine. The access to the scoring blade is right here. This is where you're going to put your Allen key. So you will remove your Allen key, you'll stick it in here after depressing this to hold the blade down, and when you stick the key in and you rotate it, it will find the actual locking point so that you can unscrew the blade and take it out. The way that you open it is going to be from left to right, because the blade is actually going in a counterclockwise fashion, so you're going to tighten it and loosen it in the opposite. This saw does come equipped with the actual offcut clear guard. It did not come with the actual splinter guard, the green one that comes in the box. It didn't have that. To tilt the saw from left to right, you have the dial here, and then when you rotate the saw around to the back, you have your other dial. So that gives you the ability to tilt your saw to a 45-degree angle on cuts. Now, if we take a look right here on the top of the saw, you have a green lever that you can push to the right or put it back to the left. Now, when I go to actually plunge the saw, right now I'm getting my full depth of cut. So I can increase my depth of cut here, and the saw goes all the way down. If I toggle this switch to the right, and then I come back to plunge the saw, that's as far as the blade is actually going to be depressed. Okay, you can see it there. It doesn't come down all the way. This is useful for if you want to just do a scoring cut on your material prior to cutting. If you just want to use the scoring feature, then you can actually, I'm going to turn on, the actual scoring blade is on, and if you take a look here, you'll see that the scoring blade comes down and the regular cutting blade is at about the same depth as the scoring blade, as opposed to if I switch off this green switch here, switch it back to the left, and when I plunge the saw, you see how much further my saw blade comes down in relationship to the scoring blade. So that's a feature that you should be aware of. We've got our kickback stop button here. You can turn it off. At this location here, you've got your speed dial indicator, and it goes from 1 all the way up to 6. The way that this new machine operates and works, you can see here on the top, you have a cord that goes from here to here. As your power comes in to the machine, it's going to be transferred to this second motor housing up here on the front. When you switch the scoring blade to the off position, it will no longer drop down when you plunge the saw. Okay, so you can use this saw with just the scoring feature. You can use it with just the primary blade, or you can use both in conjunction. This saw also, as I was explaining before, gives you the ability to alter the scoring cut, making it be to the right of your blade or to the left of your blade, and that gives you the ability to make sure that your scoring cut is where you would like it to be, in line with your cut. So on the top of the saw here, if you take a look, you have your fast fix. You're going to lift that, and if I turn the saw back around this way and you take a look at the fast fix, you see that I have an Allen key for my blade changes in the tool, and when I go to actually lower the saw, you hear a click, it locks in place. That's going to give me the ability to access the spindle with the onboard stored, or with the onboard Allen key, to be able to change my blade. And when I'm finished, I will go ahead and return the Allen key to its compartment. When I shut that, it automatically puts the saw back into its retracted mode. So in order to adjust the saw for your rail, there's two green dials. There's one here, and then there's also going to be one here. And you will rotate those accordingly, left or right, in order to get your saw fitted for your rail. So once you put the saw on the rail, you will tighten it up to where the saw is unable to slide forward, and then you will come back and loosen both the front and the back green knobs to loosen the saw so that it just slides freely up and down the rail without any kind of wobble or play in the travel. That will give you the ability to have the straightest, most accurate cut, and that's how you would actually conform the saw to whichever rail you're going to use. Now, obviously, when you set the saw up on your rail, you have to be mindful. If you have another track saw, you want to consider this has a 1.8 millimeter blade. The previous versions of the Festool track saw, the TS75, the REB track saw, and the original corded Festool track saw, they all had a 2.2 millimeter blade, which means the blade was a little bit thicker, which means if you run this saw on those tracks, then you may have a little bit of a gap because the actual zero clearance was basically married to that 2.2 curve. So when you're starting out new, you want to use this on either a fresh rail or definitely on a rail that has a 1.8 millimeter blade. The TS60 has a 1.8 millimeter blade, and also the new cordless saw, the KEB, has a 1.8 millimeter blade, so you may not have an issue with those particular saws. However, you still want to check it and make sure that you're not getting too far away or cutting too far in, and that's where using this particular saw gets to be a little bit more tricky. You have to pay a little bit more attention because of the scoring cut. The fact that you can move the scoring blade to the left or the right. If I were to try to use this track saw on my, say, my 55 millimeter or 55 inch rail that I use my KEB saw on, there's a chance that I could have the scoring cut just to the left of my primary blade. And what that could do is damage my zero clearance. So then when I go back to that KEB saw and I go to use it, I will wonder when I line up my track to my cut why my cut is like a millimeter or a fraction off, and that would be because I put this saw on that rail without it being lined up. So I'm not going to do it in this video because I believe it'll make this video a little bit too long, but I will, as I play with it and I learn how to adjust it and dial it in perfectly, I will upload a video that goes over getting this saw aligned. So the method that I'm anticipating, I haven't read the manual. Let me just, get that out there. I'm going to read it first and then I'm going to come back. But the method that I'm intending on doing is taking a piece of melamine that I purchased and basically just making a cut, just like it is, off the rail. Just trying to go as straight as I can. I may put a straight edge up against the side and run it along just to see where my scoring blade is scoring, right? So I'll probably like make a scoring cut maybe halfway through the material, then I'll come back and make a full depth cut behind it and see if my scoring blade is to the left or to the right of that, and then I'll use the controls that I pointed out that are located within here to kind of get it lined up properly. And once I get it lined up properly and dialed in, then I will take this saw to the 75 millimeter or 75 inch rail that I have behind me and marry those two together. I'll get it all squared up and tightened up with the knobs here so that it runs true on the rail without wobble, but then I'll also make sure that it is going in line. And then I'm going to take my wife's labeling machine and I'm going to label this saw or this rail back here for the TSV, so that will let me know that anytime I'm going to use the TSV 60, I'm only going to use that particular rail. Now, the only time I would have to change that would be as if I decided to use a different type of blade within the saw, which would be, like obviously a different tooth blade, different tooth count, or a different material type. Then I may have to go back and start that all over. So that's how I'm going to move forward with getting to know this saw and also kind of getting it dialed in. This is basically a simple unboxing of the saw and just going over the mechanical differences. One of the things that I will note that I didn't speak about, if you look here on the tip of the saw, there is a -1 degree marking, as if the saw will pivot this way to give you an undercut. Now, I've looked all over this saw, and if you look at the TSV 60, there's actually a metal plate in here and with a button that you can click that would allow the saw to actually, if this is flat, it will bevel in just to 1 degree. I do not see any kind of controls or mechanisms that would allow for that. And then also, if you consider this, the way that this is constructed, it would have to shift within the device. So it does bevel out to 45 degrees, but it does not appear to bevel in to the -1 degree, even though the marking is located here on the front. So just keep that in mind. You've got your dust port back here, if I didn't mention that. But anyways, guys, I want to thank you for just sticking with me as I kind of go over the features on this particular saw. And I will be uploading a video where I actually get this saw dialed in and also, use it. And I'm going to, create a video where basically I'm comparing this saw with, all my lineup of track saws that I own to see if there's actually going to be a great difference, because then that way, I can, inform myself and I'll know, okay, yeah, this was just a waste of money. If basically I'm getting the same quality of cut with the KEB, which is the cordless track saw, that I would get with this track saw, then that would mean that all of this extra expense, there's no value in it. But if there is a better cut that I see with my own eyes in my own shop, and not from, any kind of sponsored or whatever video, then I can clearly, say that, okay, this may be an option that, was a worthwhile purchase for me, simply because if you're going to buy a tool, and this is if you have the money. If you don't have the money, then it's not something really to be considering. But if you have the money, you have the ability to invest in a way to where this particular saw does everything that the TS55 does without, well, unless you compare cordless to corded, but it does everything that that saw does. It does everything that the HKC does, which is this saw here, by being able to use the FSK rail. But then it also adds on the scoring cut for cutting laminates, which is a feature that is on the Mafel 55 saw. Right now, their mechanism is a little bit different. From my understanding, the scoring blade kind of cuts either to the left or to the right, and then the blade I think it cuts, it scores, and then you cut again, and the main blade moves over just a hair. I've heard a little bit of controversy about that, about whether the quality of it, but then I've also heard through reading that basically, or I've also read that basically some people say that those people may have just not had their saw dialed in, or maybe there was some kind of manufacturer issue. Regardless, this is Festool's answer to really that Mafel track saw. And if you consider that, if you were actually the type of person that was comparing one brand versus another, the Mafel, I'm not sure how long it came out, but obviously Festool was the originator in making track saws, to my understanding from the research that I've done and what I've heard. They created the first track saw, but when Mafel came out with their 55 depth of cut saw, they made it right off the bat have the ability, the whole side pops down to change the blade, which is convenient. They enclosed it for better dust collection, which is also convenient. But they also provided a larger motor in that particular saw by comparison to the original TS55 from Festool. And they also put a scoring feature in the saw out the box. So if a person would have went with that particular model, then they would have had all these features, and they may not be inspired to purchase a saw like this if they're comfortable with the way the scoring cut works, and if they're comfortable, with everything. Now, with the release of the TSV 60, what you have is a motor that's just a little bit more powerful, because I believe, my numbers may be off, but I believe the original TS55 had a 1200 watt motor. The original Mafel had a 1400 watt motor, which translates to power. And then this saw comes in with a 1500 watt motor. And so basically this TSV 60 and also the TS60 both basically jumped ahead of the Mafel in regards to power. So that argument can't be made anymore. Now, I don't have the Mafel in shop to be able to test it to compare that, but basically just going off of the wattage numbers, the TSV 60 and the TS 60 both basically take that wattage power thrown back away from the Mafel. And now this edition is making this saw more competitive with the Mafel right out of the box by having a scoring feature. And Festool's just chosen to go a unique way by not using the same blade to do the scoring cut, but to use a separate blade. Now, there's pros to that, there's cons to that. Obviously, you have the variability now because of the way that the blade, can be adjusted interchangeably, or the way that the blade can be actually altered without affecting the main blade. That introduces an opportunity for error, right? So it's up to the user to dial it in and get it where it needs to get so that you're getting the results that you want. Whereas with the Mafel, it's all internal and mechanized, and so if you do adjust something, you're adjusting that one blade. You are adjusting that one blade and not adjusting, two independent blades. Now this blade here, from what I understand, it doesn't have really any adjustment, but the fact that this blade can be off or maybe knocked off of its being parallel with the original blade, it gives you just a little bit more work that you have to do to make sure your saw is dialed in. But if you take good care of if you set it up right the first time and you take good care of your tool, then you shouldn't have a problem. I don't think I have much more to add to this particular video. As you can see, this video has gone a little bit longer than it probably should have, but it also gives me the opportunity to go over the fact that, a little bit of information in comparison to the Mafel from, the research that I've done, and then also, just kind of, giving you a little bit of a closer look at what is being offered in this offering. So those of you that were willing to wait, which, confessing, I wasn't. When the TS60 came out, I went up there and I bought it a few days after release. And I don't regret buying it, but at that time, because these tools are released over in Europe and Germany before they're released here like a year in advance, there's no guarantee that these tools will be coming here. So I mean, just look at the the Capex 60 corded version. That's not here. Look at the track saw, the 85 that actually has the ability to do like dado grooves. That's not here. The VAXIS system is no longer here in the United States. So not every tool is going to be available to us here in the US, and as a result, you have to pick and choose what you're going to choose to buy. And as things have changed in the economy and all that, I've seen more and more tools not come on the shelf, or basically when you think about it, it's like a long period of time before it actually comes to us. And then there's also concessions. So I'm not mad that I bought both of them. What that's going to give me the ability to do here on this channel, I mean, it's called Daddy Share Space. I'm going to use them all in different projects and different things, and I'll be able to give my honest opinion, being unsponsored, and basically say, I like this saw for this, or I like that saw for that. All right, guys, I want to thank you so much for taking time to watch this video, and I will see you in my next one. Take care.